Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah, we'll get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. So inshallah, I want to do the English. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. We intend to learn and to teach, to remind and be reminded, to benefit and be benefited, to improve and be improved, and to encourage holding fast to the book of God and the way of his messenger, and to call unto guidance and to direct towards good, hoping for the countenance of God and his pleasure and his proximity and his reward. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. And thank you all for joining on after Asr time in Ramadan, one of the hardest times to focus and listen to anything. So thank you all for being here, and for those who are following online, barakallahu fikum. May Allah help us to benefit, inshallah, from this gathering, and may it be accepted as a gathering of remembrance in this beautiful month, inshallah. So we're going to be continuing in the book, The Kingdom of the Heart from Habib Umar. And I had shot very high last time. I thought I could finish 4 chapters in a single session. We finished 2. So today we're only going to finish 2 chapters in a single session. And we are going in order. So for this week, it's chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 3 is entitled The Tongue and Its Effects. And he starts with a beautiful prayer that has to do with speech. He says, all praise belongs to Allah, the turner of hearts. He is the one who makes the hearts of whomever he will steadfast upon what he loves. And he quotes this ayah from the Quran. Allah makes the believers steadfast with the firm word of faith in this worldly life and the hereafter. But Allah leaves the wrongdoers to stray, for Allah does whatever he wills. Actually, let me share my screen as well so we can follow along in the Quranic gems that are in these chapters. And the word that's used for this word of faith is bil-qawl al-thabit. It's like a firm word, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us strong through this speech, and not just any speech, but a firm word of faith. And this is, I think, fitting as we talk about speech and the effect of speech on the heart, because he does do this in the 2 chapters. He talks about how negative speech obviously has a negative impact on the heart, but beautiful and positive speech has a very positive impact on the heart. And so the qawl al-thabit, right, is something that's going to have a very positive impact on the heart. And again, he repeats the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, truly within the body there is a piece of flesh. If it is sound, the entire body is sound. But if it is corrupted, then the entire body is corrupted, and it is the heart. As it relates to speech, he said that whenever a human being wants to say something, now this was interesting for me because I thought, doesn't the nafs sometimes want to speak? Isn't speech a desire that comes from the lower self usually? So he says, Allah has made it such that when one speaks, the motivation to do so stems from the heart. Subsequently, the words uttered then have an impact on the heart. So it doesn't mean that the nafs doesn't also have a desire for speech, but he's saying that this desire also resides within the heart itself, and the heart can have both positive and negative desires. It can have a desire for positive speech. It can have a desire for negative speech, and that can come from the heart. So it's capable of that as well. so the desire comes from the same place that it has an impact on, right? So the desire to, and I think the reason why this is so amazing to me is we immediately experience the benefits or the costs of our own speech. Like our hearts change with what we say and what we don't say. And what we hear, which is, speech that we're receiving, that's another chapter, and what we don't hear. And he also mentions that physical action begins as a motivation in the heart. And again, whatever we're doing starts in the heart. And the impact of what we're doing then returns to the heart. And this is why he says, like, focus on your heart, because your heart is always telling you, like, what's going on. When your heart is troubled, pay attention. When your heart is at peace, pay attention. When your heart is, um, you are closer to God, or you feel that you are closer to God, and you're having those experiences, pay attention, because your heart is giving you some indication of the impact of different things. And it can be, and we've said this many times at Majlis, it can be sometimes that we're doing something right and good, and we feel bad. Okay, we might feel bad while we're doing something right and good. And how do I distinguish that from that, like, protect myself from having self-doubt about continuing to do something good, right? So I'll give you an example. Maybe a person, I don't know, offers someone else their space in a line. They're in a grocery store. Go ahead, you go in front of me, right? You say, okay. And then the next person, they see someone else and they're like, okay, go. That person comes with like a family of 10 people, whatever it is. And all of a sudden you're like back here. Person could be feeling at that moment, why did I do this, right? They're feeling the effect of, it's an emotional, normal response to, maybe something like getting themselves into more than what they had bargained for. So in that moment, they feel bad, but what they did was good. And that good thing that they did still is having a positive impact on their heart. And many times when people are in tribulation also, they're going through a lot of tests. And the test on the outside looks terrible, but then they'll say in those moments that I've never felt God's presence more. I've never prayed to him more. I've never been so focused in the way I am in my prayers as during this terrible time that I've gone through. And so feeling bad is not necessarily what we're talking about here. We're not talking about like just regular emotional responses to difficulty, right? And that patience is not something, the practice of patience has its reward because it burns. Like it's not sweet, right? Even beautiful patience burns. But the heart is, the sensation that one feels in the heart is slightly different than this. And Habib Umar is really asking us to try to cultivate an awareness of the heart that is clear for us, that's different than the awareness of obviously what emotions and difficulties and things that we're going through. So, so I remember like, there's many times when people would say like they did something that was, seemingly hard. Their body is physically tired. They're sore. They need they need sleep, but if on the inside they're flying, they're flying on the inside. People who make Hajj and Umrah, they're ready to do another one. Like as soon as they get home, they get their rest, they're like, send me back again, So again, being able to distinguish between certain kinds of feelings and the impact that something might have in one's heart. And at the end of the day, it's very subjective, right? So the aql has to process this. It's very subjective. So as an example, patience burns a little bit, but is this something good to do? Yes. And recentering within intention, yes. Wanting this to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's really the key to any action bringing light to the heart. It's not the good action itself that brings the light into our hearts. It's the sincerity that we do it with that becomes the invitation for that to bring and return into our hearts light. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us ikhlas, may Allah grant us sincerity. And again, the sincerity is the motivation of pleasing God. Like this is the why of why a person is doing what they're doing. And as much as one is able to, removing all other intentions from the heart. So he says, conversely, motivations for all sins also originate from the heart, beginning with a thought that passes through it. So a bad deed starts as a thought, and a good deed starts as a thought, right? That's how we experience it on our side. And a sin comes as a thought, and that we believe, right, that the shaitan will come and whisper a bad idea to us. And we've said this many times, is that like if at the first time we think this thought of doing something bad or wrong or destructive, if we recognize this is a satanic impulse, right, and we seek God's protection, it actually we're protected from it. It's not going to come back. But if we've accepted it, if like we heard the thought and we start engaging it, then now we've allowed it to enter the nafs. And now shaitan can walk away and it will repeat itself within our thoughts over and over again, right? Until we put a stop to it. And so that's where our personal responsibility for and being like vigilant over the thoughts that we have. And it's really interesting to me because I took a class on Buddhism at Bayan because I had to do interreligious. And I took one also in dealing with Christian. It was moral injury, but looking at it from a Christian perspective and how people heal from moral injury, which is moral injury for those who don't know is like a form of PTSD that it's not really PTSD, but it has the symptoms of PTSD, but it comes from being so disillusioned from what authority does. Like when authority really abuses its power, people can have symptoms like PTSD, even though it's not PTSD. And this happens a lot. This happens like a lot for veterans of war because they sign up thinking they're going to do one thing and then they end up doing a lot of things they didn't want to do. So, so regardless, this issue of thoughts is so important in psychology. It's important in Buddhism. It's important in healing from moral injury. Like the entire discussion on whether it's interfaith or secular is look at what your thoughts are saying and identify negative thoughts and toxic thoughts and put them somewhere else. And how do you, each one of them has a process by which thought is purified so people can be left to be at peace with themselves. And what's interesting is that we have like this is our spiritual tradition. Like we didn't have to create meditation systems because we're supposed to practice muraqabah, this idea of identifying the thoughts and identifying their sources and making decisions about what we accept and what we don't accept. One of the things that's important in this regard, as in terms of thoughts, is um, and this happens a lot, is where a person recognizes, okay, here's an impulse to do something bad or wrong. All right. Okay, I'm going to do this thing that's bad or wrong, and then I'm going to repent from it later. Let me just do this now, and then like years, I'll fix myself like years later. I'm not gonna, this is what I want to do right now. So don't, no one say anything to me right now. I want to do this bad thing. I know it's bad. I'm going to continue doing it. And then I'm going to clean up. And sometime I'm going to clean up and I'm going to never do it again. But for right now, I just don't want to be that person. So the reason why this is a really destructive thought is because it's not a person who's like fallen into doing something out of a temporary weakness that they've said like, okay, I didn't want to do something. So I'll give you a very simple example that's related to our topic. Backbiting. Like essentially, what's the right word for young people? What's the word for backbiting these days? Is it called sipping tea? No? Spilling tea, spilling the tea. Yeah, sorry. I never get them right. So that's why I have to ask. They call it spilling the tea. If so, talking badly about other people. When I was young, they would say, don't talk trash about people. It was called talking trash or talking smack. Right? This is like a huge sin in Islam. It's a huge sin to talk badly, to use your speech to defame someone else, to remove their dignity. In the slightest of things, it's like a very big sin. And when I was younger and growing up, and alhamdulillah, I had really good Muslim friends. I remember one of my good friends, like there was a talk in the masjid about why backbiting is such a big problem and it's a big sin. And it's even though it's common, something being common doesn't mean it's right. Like internally, we have a compass to know even if everyone else is doing it, I don't need to participate, and I don't want to be part of that. So, so I had a really good friend, and the wonderful thing is kids are really honest. The kids are more honest. We're very honest about our experiences then. I don't think I could say, or me or her, anyone could say this now, but at that time, this is what she said. We were like 10, 11 years old. So she said, I know backbiting is haram, but I love it so much. It just feels so good. So, so this is what she said. She's like, I know backbiting is haram, but I love it so much. It just feels so good. So, okay. This is why I love working with children because it's like you have such a direct conversation with what's real, what's really going on. So this is a very interesting thing because an adult may not abandon backbiting. An adult, like you might remind a grown up, a senior person, elderly person, maybe we shouldn't talk about that or whatever, and they might be offended that you reminded them, and they might make a bunch of excuses and say things like, "But it's true," or "I'd say it right in front of them. It's not backbiting if I would say it if it's right in front of them." And the truth is, it is backbiting if you say it right in front of them, because backbiting, the definition for us is to say something behind someone's back that the other person wouldn't want you to say. That's it. They just about them. That's the definition. So, and so, there's all of these defenses, and I'm like, instead of making these defenses, why don't we just say, it's fun, I love it, I enjoy it so, why don't, with the 10-year-old statement, I can't leave it because I enjoy it, and that's actually why the person is, holding on to it. And the problem with that intention is Imam Ghazali says when people do something like that, like I know it's wrong and I'm still going to do it, like they're insisting on it, it removes a part of their intellect. Like an aspect of their intellect becomes deficient because it's not that they fell or they slipped, it's that they made a choice to do something they knew clearly was something they shouldn't have done. So he says when people do that, a portion of the intellect departs. And this is Imam Ghazali, it's not a hadith, alhamdulillah, but he says a portion of the intellect departs and never returns to him again. So, um, Allah, I believe in Tawbah. I believe in full repentance and purification. And, what is it called? I'm no one to have a difference of opinion with Imam Ghazali, but I think the way I take the statement is like to take the gravity of it. Like no one should ever, if you're struggling with something, that we turn to God and say, I'm struggling with this, please help me to stop doing it. But not that the opposite of that is, I will do this wrong thing and I will not leave it until I feel like leaving it. He mentions that when we worship, this also has an impact, not just on our hearts, but then it also has an impact on our speech itself. So he says acts of worship play a strong role in regulating our speech. For example, speaking to any created being during the prayer actually invalidates prayer, right? So when we pray, our speech is all worship. If someone were to walk into the room and we say, "Assalamu alaikum, how are you?" We've automatically like left the prayer because speech itself breaks to any human being, breaks prayer. But interestingly, there's speech to one that does not break prayer. And we do it in every prayer. Who is the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu in all of the narrations of the Tashahhud, they all say that we say in our prayer, Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon you, O Prophet, and the mercy of God and his blessings. So in here, we're not saying upon him, we're saying upon you. I think that's really interesting for people who have an issue with conceiving of salawat reaching the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu is that even in the form of the prayer itself, and the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu used to teach us this prayer, the companion said, the way that he would teach us chapters of the Quran. So like this is an emphasized, like no doubt about it, aspect of our prayers. No, there's no the form of the we're not going to say, no, you don't say this line, or no, there's complete consensus. And in our prayers, we actually send the salawat directly upon the Prophet. And we don't say him, we say you, knowing that he receives our salam in that way. The Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu he said himself, it is improper to speak to people during prayer. And so then prayer is one of the places where we first, sort of, not first, but it's this place where like any speech outside of what is expressly prescribed is forbidden, right? So there's already a constraint or limitation. When it comes to fasting, fasting is also something that has an impact on our speech. The Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu said, if someone does not leave false testimony and acting upon it, then Allah has no need for him to leave his food and drink. And in the past, when I had read this narration, to bear false testimony and to act upon it, for some reason I couldn't think of any example. Like, okay, I understand, like if this idea of testifying to something that is false and then acting upon it is also false, and that entire thing is going to this idea that God has no need for them to fast, if that's what you're going to do. But in the times that we're in, and actually with what's going on in the world, we have like a macro picture of what false testimony and acting upon false testimony can do, right? So if you think about what's going on in Gaza right now, what's being reported about Palestinians, everyone knows it's false. Like everyone knows that an entire community has been oppressed for how many years, and a whole like false narrative was established, and people said we're all going to agree that this is the truth, even though they know it's not the truth. So like you could say a community of people got together and said we are all going to spread this as truth, even though it is not the truth. And then they bore testimony to it, and then they acted upon it. And what did it lead to? It led to oppression for many, many years, and the genocide that's happening in Gaza. And today, even the silencing of people who are trying to say, no, what you're doing is wrong. So bearing false testimony and acting upon it is the recipe for oppression. Whoever does that has oppressed someone. What do you need testimony for? Because you need an eyewitness to say something happened or didn't happen with other people. Then you act upon false testimony. Necessarily, that means dhulm, like real oppression. So the one who's going to be involved in real oppression, then Allah has no need for them to fast. That's a very heavy hadith. This is the first time I've thought about it that way, given everything that's happening in the world. And also the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, fasting is a shield. So on a day when one of you is fasting, do not yell nor say obscene or vile words. If someone insults him or affronts him, he should say, I'm fasting, I'm fasting. After the class is over, I'll ask you guys if you have any stories of the I am fasting in Ramadan, because we are tested in this, And then maybe I can share one story. Yeah. So like in Islamic schools, again, children's stories, they're the best. It wasn't that anyone was even trying to pick a fight. It was one of the jokes of basically like don't disagree with me in any way. So if two kids in a classroom are having any kind of like not even a fight, but like a beginning to have a disagreement, one side will just be like, I'm fasting, meaning like I have to be right. You have to affirm that I'm absolutely right now because I'm fasting. That's how the children utilize this hadith. You could say weaponize this hadith. And so anyways, the point is that we have this in our tradition, is that the whole purpose of fasting is to get closer to God. It's an act of worship that's pleasing to Him. And it's something that by itself, it's not just accepted, right? We mentioned last time that even our fasting, if we do what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, imanan wa ihtisaban, with faith and with this hope in God that it's accepted, then that fast is something that when we complete the month of Ramadan, all of the sins of our past can be forgiven. And so intentionality has everything to do with the way that our actions are accepted by Allah and the way that they have an impact on the heart and the way that then that has an impact on our speech. So yelling or saying obscene or vile words is something that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ encouraged us not to do. Now, generally speaking, alhamdulillah, I don't think I've seen people do this very much in Ramadan until after iftar. So usually it's like people have broken their fast. Everyone's in the masjid for Tarawih, and there's like a fight in the parking lot over a parking spot. And as Sheikh Walid likes to say, then people get there, you see them making martial arts moves in the parking lot, but ready for a parking spot. But that's at the end of the fasting day. So I don't know. No, but the point is that that generally speaking, alhamdulillah, there is something to fasting that because you're in a constant mode of feeling that the state you're in is for the sake of God. Every time we're hungry or thirsty, it's like there's a self-restraint. We're practicing the whole day. So our hearts are connected to Allah on a day of fasting in a way that no other time are we connected to Him like that. And it's without saying even a word. It's not a remembrance of moving our tongues. It's the remembrance of hunger, for the sake of God, that we actually remember Him and we're close to Him during that time. And we don't feel inclined. If in feeling what we're feeling, we're thinking about what we're doing as an act of worship, we don't feel inclined to yell or to say obscene or vile words. Fasting itself is one of those things that takes away from or it weakens the different desires. right? So it weakens our, or tempers, moderates our desire to eat, right? So when it's time to break the fast, a little bit of food makes us really full. And we're kind of frustrated because we're like, I wanted to eat like at least a little bit more of this, but my stomach shrunk and now I can only eat this much, you know? So it literally moderates these appetites, and it moderates this even desire to be someone who uses our speech to harm someone else, to yell or say obscene and vile words. Habib Umar says something really beautiful. I just want to read it as he wrote it. He says, "You now understand that a person who has no care for what he utters risks losing all the treasures and spiritual experiences that worship yields, leaving him with only the empty form of worship which does not benefit him." So again, like the way that worship has a beautifying effect on character, a beautifying effect on the heart, a spiritual experience, not just a physical performance. This is all connected to eventually how things come out, and what we say and what we don't say. Here, there's a really important reminder. And you know, he says, but there's parents in the room, so this is for us. He says, a child may hear a foul word from his or her parents that then becomes embedded within that child's heart and remains there. The child then utters that word many times in his or her life. The neglectful parent who had not realized that a human being's most precious possession is his heart carries that burden. The trust, the heart of this child is placed on the shoulders of that child's mother and father. These parents were oblivious to this and betrayed the trust placed in the hearts of their children. They said or did things in front of their children that corrupted their hearts, and this corruption might linger with that child for the rest of his or her life. And we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that. I mean, I'm a parent. This paragraph scared me a lot. And not in the sense that, like, if I want to raise my children to have good behavior, then I have to really work always on my own behavior. And the easiest thing for a parent to do is to yell at kids and say, what you're doing is wrong. But if we actually just uphold what's right within ourselves, then and we correct them with kindness, then we actually help them to become kind, and because we're being kind to them. Um, so I just this is really important, I think, because sometimes there's two concepts. One of them is that when someone repents, obviously, like all of us, when we make mistakes in any aspect of our life, we turn back to God and we seek His forgiveness. And we believe in that He's the most merciful, and He forgives us when we come back to Him, and we seek that from Him sincerely. And if we've harmed someone, to actually apologize to them and seek their forgiveness as well. And that removes the sin. That it's no longer in our hisab, it's no longer in our mizan. Like we don't have to worry about it on the day of judgment because we've been forgiven. But there's something else that I like that Dr. Jackson talks about sometimes. And I think it's a really important statement. He says you can't repent from a broken psyche, right? You can't repent from a broken psyche. And what he's saying is that the sin can be forgiven, but the effect of the sin is now left. The effect of the sin is now something that might need healing and might need therapy and might need all kinds of things. Like, how do I remove the effect of the sin? And alhamdulillah, our spiritual tradition actually has something to say about even how to remove the effects of our own wrongdoings on ourselves, to how to remove the effects of wrongdoings on others. But the reason why I really tremendously appreciated this paragraph from Habib Umar is because Habib Umar is a scholar based out of the East. He's in Yemen, based out of Yemen. He travels the world, mashallah. But you can say very like a lot of Eastern cultures, um, they, you know, like Islam does definitely have a lot to say about children's respect for parents. A lot. I mean, birrul walidain is a huge concept in our religion, to be good and to be our best to our parents. But it also has advice and not just advice, it has something to say for two parents. And this paragraph is something that I think it balances out the concept of birrul walidain, because in many parts of the Muslim world, I think the idea that kids have to be excellent to their parents is what's emphasized, but parents are not given the same level of don't yell at them, don't abuse them emotionally, physically. There's that address is because of culture is sometimes, I shouldn't say sometimes, is many times lacking. And so, and to the extent where if someone is nice in the way where they do parenting in a particular culture, people may just look at them and say, "You're such a bad parent. Why are you being nice to them? You should be spanking them right now. You should be hitting them. You should be doing this because that's what the cultural norm is um, for raising a child." So what I really appreciate about what Habib Umar, who's someone who's in the East, is he's saying in that context, this paragraph, what a person says has an effect on the child's heart. So we have to be really careful about everything we say because they're a trust from God and they will carry in their hearts whatever it is that comes out from us. And so God help us all with our job as being good parents, and God help the children to be good children to their parents, inshallah, both sides. The religion tells both sides to be good to each other, not just one side. Now, I wanted to go on to some of the verses he mentions, and these are really beautiful verses about how to deal with speech. In Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Tell my believing servants to say only what is best." And then he says, "Satan certainly seeks to sow discord among them. Satan is indeed a sworn enemy to humankind." So, وَقُلْ لِعِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And ahsan is something that came up last week. It's coming up now also. And ahsan is not just what's good or what's beautiful or what's excellent. It is what is best. And so he says, when you have two words on your mind, by words he means things to say. You have the option to say this or you have the option to say that. What this ayah is encouraging us to do is to choose the best possible thing that we can say. So the wrong question would be, am I allowed to say such and such? Am I allowed to say such and such? Why? Because you're looking at something just to barely get me out of the prohibited, right? Versus like, tell my servants to say what is best. Okay, so don't like this red line is too low to aim for. We want to try, may Allah help us, especially me, people who talk too much, to aim for the best speech. And that requires us to pause a little bit and to think about, okay, what's actually going to be beneficial here? What's actually going to be um, something that God is pleased with, or could be the most pleased with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, oh, wait, let me just comment quickly. The last part of the verse, Shaitan certainly seeks to sow discord among them. Okay, so Satan is an accursed enemy to humankind. And you know what can usually not be misunderstood? The best speech. Ambiguous words, the barely allowable, the thing that, those are words that can be misunderstood. But you know what Shaitan will have a really hard time trying to get someone to misunderstand or cause corruption or cause a fight through is the best possible words, like in an engagement when two people are dealing with each other. So this pause in our speech, and I would say even today in our text messages and in the way that we communicate on our phones or whatever devices we're using, if we can just take a pause and say, okay, especially in, I would say, like a heated situation, a conflict situation, an upsetting situation, that's when it becomes even more important to use the best possible speech. Why? Because Shaitan, as a sworn enemy to mankind, he seeks one thing, is to cause division and to cause people to be fighting with each other and to be harming each other. So there's great protection. There's great, like, in terms of peace and security and good relations, in trying to not just speak in a good way, but try to speak in the best way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, I think this is the wrong verse. Oh no, it does. So this is in Surah Al-Baqarah. And remember when we took a covenant from the children of Israel. This is Bani Israel, not the modern day Israel nation state. Bani Israel, which are the Jewish believers that followed the prophets that we would say they were all Muslim in the sense that they were all submitters to God, but they came from Bani Israel. So stating, worship none but God, worship none but Allah, be kind to your parents, to your relatives, to orphans and the needy, speak kindly to people, establish prayer and pay alms tax. And then Allah is telling them in the Quran, but you Israelites turned away, except for a few of you, and you were indifferent. And the word that's used here in terms of speech, وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. So to all people, we don't just speak nicely to Muslims, and we don't just speak nicely to friends. We speak nicely. The idea of like, my speech is supposed to be good, not because of who you are, but because of who I am, right? If I'm a Muslim who's submitting to God, and God has told me to speak well to people, then it's not about like what you did or didn't do and who you are and what you deserve. It's that God has commanded me to speak well to people. So this is something that's there in principle. And in this ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually calling out Bani Israel because he says, you turned away. This was a covenant. This was an oath that they had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they turned away. And then he says, except for a few of you. Why? Because they were always from Bani Israel, a group of them that actually were sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all the others, it says, were indifferent. وَأَنْتُمْ مُعْرِضُونَ. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told us, whoever believes in God in the last day, then let him say what is good or keep silent. And how many times have you ever felt, regretful? You could have said something, you could have stayed quiet, you could have said something, you could have stayed quiet. And you're like, no, I'm going to say it. And then afterwards, like, I shouldn't have said it. And once a word has left your mouth, you can't do anything to bring it back. It's already been said. The only thing you can do is say sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Didn't mean it that way. Like, even sometimes in a joke, if you have a doubt about how a joke is going to be received, just don't do it, even if you mean well. Okay. So I'll give you guys a true example. Just happened to me last week. I was doing a qiyam in a particular masjid. I was actually wearing this exact same outfit. It's a reminder to myself. And the female side of the audience was 75%, the male side of the audience was 25%. And I was joking about how do we get the two sides of the audience to be like more equal in terms of numbers, because we need to have enough brothers in the community that sisters can marry. I said it along those lines. I don't know how it came out, but when I was first saying it, I thought people would laugh, but instead, a whole group of the audience just goes, ooh. And I was like, no, that was not meant to be an insult. And like, there's like a cold silence, so my husband was sitting next to me. So he was like, they don't know you. So this is not a good first introduction. He's like, have you said this in the majlis, people know you, they know what you mean. It's different. This is like your first time coming to this community. Anyways. So don't do what I just did. I'm a really good example of someone to not follow when it comes to when in doubt about a joke, just don't do it. If you're not in doubt about it, you know the person, you have rapport, you know it's going to be understood well the way you intend it. That's different. Because we want to bringing happiness to the heart of believers is a good deed. It's one of the things the Prophet Muhammad said is a good deed. But sometimes good intentions are not enough when it comes to our speech. We have to use more judgment, and may Allah help us to use more judgment. And to not hurt or offend people, because that's not what we should be doing. So one of the things that I thought was really beautiful, that I recently experienced this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and speak to all people with goodness. And speak to all people with goodness. وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. And in Arabic, it's the alif lam of nas is like literally all mankind, all people. Speak to them with goodness. And then he says, make your speech an embodiment of beauty, have people's hearts and souls love your words and bring joy to whoever hears them. And I was like, wow, that's a really amazing intention, that a person speaks seeking to bring joy into the hearts of other people, into their hearts, and that the speech itself would allow that person to love what is being said. So I was in Colombia, and I was there for the retreat recently, and like a really senior scholar was there. And this is someone that is very hard for people sometimes to see. They have to travel to other countries because, he doesn't have a visa into the US. And so it's just a privilege to be in the company of a scholar like this, a great sheikh. And usually in these gatherings, like there's people who are trying to sit closer and listen, and there's other people they're like, we can't sit closer, because it's too crowded. And there's one sister that I really, really love, and the entire time she was just serving everyone and from the kitchen and just taking care of all the details of the program. And she was just working hard the whole time. And the sheikh is there and she's making sure that everyone else gets a chance to talk to him. Everyone else is getting their turn. And she's not even expecting a turn for herself. She's just kind of like, I'm here to help and you guys all get, like, she doesn't almost subhanAllah, she's such a humble person. She doesn't see herself as someone who's going to benefit in some special way if she gets this, she thinks everyone else will benefit more than her. So she really puts everyone else before her and just a really beautiful person. So, this may or may not make sense, but I'm going to try. Where it's after prayer time, and it's after the day's over for the program, and we're in the home where this event is finished. Like everyone else has left, and now there's just the people who live there and some of the volunteers that were there. So we finished praying, and as soon as we finished praying, and the sheikh is there, he's with us. Um, she turns to me and starts having a conversation about something that was really disturbing to her that day, which is, forgive me, it's about a cat and a rat. The cat normally kills a rat every day, all right? But today, the cat didn't kill the rat, the cat tortured the rat. And it was really disturbing to her because she saw the cat like essentially break the rat's back and it was like wiggling and she had to figure out a way to give it a quick end and get rid of it. And so she's really disturbed by what she saw. So she's telling me about it. And the sheikh is right there, like literally, like just, I don't know, like where you're sitting, right? And maybe a little closer even, right? And so she's telling me about this, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure he can hear her talking about the cat and the rat. So and so I am listening to her story, and I want to hold space for it. But at the same time, I'm like, maybe we shouldn't be talking about a cat and a rat for a sheikh. Like he's right here, and he did the most amazing thing. So everyone else is there too. Everyone else is kind of waiting to get a chance to talk to him and stuff. As he sees the sister, and he she's talking to me. Not oblivious, but her focus is we're having a conversation. So the sheikh actually enters the conversation, and he asks her, "So you saw the cat weaken the rat?" And she just pauses. You know, it's like the cat, it like essentially like it was disturbing when you saw the cat weaken the rat. And she pauses and she's like, yeah, the cat is dead. She tells the whole story to the sheikh. And he's like just being really understanding of the fact that this was disturbing to her. That's what he did. And he held space for that conversation. And I was just to myself, I was just it actually made me emotional. Because many times people think they need to. Many times people think that in order to have a relationship or benefit from the mentorship and the guidance of a sheikh, they need to be themselves a scholar or a student of knowledge, and they need to sit up front and they need to be the person who's like always up in his face and like just in right here. And and that's great. And you see a lot of shuyukh and they have a lot of scholars as their students. But I've always thought to myself, what about just like really good people? What about wonderful people? Who is their sheikh? What about the women who are doing all the work for the programs? No one knows their name. Or the volunteers and the people who are doing all the cleaning and just making sure that everything is going right. Like, who is their sheikh? Who is paying attention to the person who made the whole thing possible that's in the back that no one knows their name, but they were the reason that the whole thing even happened? Who is the sheikh of that person? And usually, who is the sheikh of these women, these who tend to do so much and who never get the front row seat and who never get to be in the meeting rooms and rarely get to be in the meeting rooms? Like, who's paying attention to them and what they're like going to be there for their mentorship? And I just thought it was really beautiful that he saw her and he recognized her, and he just by him validating what she was going through in the conversation, I think that was something that is a lesson for scholars everywhere. Is like that's a sheikh. That's a real sheikh. And as someone who's been to conferences and big conferences and small conferences, and I've seen many scholars of different calibers especially in rooms that are they call the speakers lounge, right? And just the scholars are wonderful people. They're great people. We should love them and respect them, as the Prophet Muhammad SAW said. But usually the way that scholars tend to focus on certain things tends to be very book smart and not very people smart. And many times not out of any kind of bad will or something. They're so in the books. They're so in the books. And they care about if someone else is too, because then they have this person a conversation partner to discuss the wonderful things that they've studied. But the sheikh, which is like the spiritual guide sheikh that he doesn't just know the knowledge, but he's actually embodied the knowledge. He's like the living book, like the Prophet Muhammad SAW was like the walking Quran. And so just the ability to notice the beauty and the goodness in people, and to say a word. When I read this, that's this exact example that came to my mind, was make your speech the embodiment of beauty. Have people's hearts and souls love your words. And bring joy to whoever hears them. The reason why this is so beautiful to me is when you've seen it, you've had the blessing of seeing it. And the opposite of it is just as ugly, right? So if this is so, so beautiful, and this is like the pinnacle of aspiration, like I wish I could be like that with my speech. Then what's the opposite of that? And what like takes us away from the path of becoming someone like that? The Prophet Muhammad SAW, he said, a man may say a word that earns him Allah's wrath, but he thinks nothing of it, yet due to it, he plummets into the fire. And then he says, a man may say a word that he sees as harmless, yet due to it, he plummets for 70 years in the fire. So words can heal people, and it can build people, and it can strengthen community, it can strengthen society, and it can it can be everything. And words can do the exact opposite, where they can destroy people, and it can destroy communities, and it can destroy reputations, and it can destroy a lot. And again, subhanAllah, like these ahadith in the times that we're living in today, they weigh so heavily because you see the effect of this on a macro level. Like there are words that can create harm, that can lead to the kind of harm that means not just racism and discrimination or microaggressions, but literally genocide. Literally, people will be killed because of the wrong words that were spoken. And that's a really terrifying concept, that like it all starts with speech. The beautifying of this world or its destruction starts with how our hearts are in the beginning, and then the kind of speech that emanates from those hearts. The Prophet Muhammad SAW, he said, be mindful of Allah with regard. This is a hadith. Well, he said, the Prophet Muhammad SAW said that our limbs, all of our body parts, every day actually say to us. So this is not the Prophet speaking, this is not Allah speaking, this is like the metaphysical tongue of our own body parts. Our limbs say to us, be mindful of God with regard to us. We are dependent on you. If you are upright, we will be upright. And if you deviate, we will deviate. Also, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, um, in terms of, tell my servants to only say what is best, right? And that the devil seeks to sow discord amongst us, is that the fact that like good speech is mentioned right before the disunity and the division that shaitan seeks to sow is like if we're having any kind of fitan, any kind of problems and on a community-wide level or socially, just know that it started, like the thing that has to be investigated is the speech, what was said, because what was said has led to gave shaitan the door to enter and to cause the problem. If a person only holds the thought into their mind and they don't say it, right? Let's say they're even having, because there's something called ghibat al-nafs, like the person can think bad thoughts about other people. That's also considered a sin in Islam, to think badly of people, but it's not the same weight as saying something, as saying it out loud. Let's say the person thinks that thing. Because they never said it, they have time to go back to their thoughts and think, you know what, maybe I was wrong about that. Or maybe I should try to bring it up with them directly. Or maybe we should reconcile. Or maybe they have opportunity in silence to resolve whatever the issue is. But as soon as the wrong thing is said, now that opens a door for shaitan to try to make these problems worse. And the Prophet Muhammad SAW also said that a good word is charity. And just like a bad word can cause tremendous harm, a good word is sadaqah. And our remembrance of God is also a sadaqah, and it's something that brings light to the heart. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, فَالتَّسْبِيحُ صَدَقَةٌ وَالتَّحْمِيدَ صَدَقَةٌ كُلُّ مَعْرُوفٍ صَدَقَةٌ. That to like remember God in our invocation, and to glorify Him is an act of charity. To praise Him is an act of charity. And every good thing actually that we do, every good and upright thing that we do is an act of charity, and all of that deposits light into our hearts. One of the arifin, one of the knowers of God said, whenever I see a person have piety in their speech, like they're careful about their speech, then I see that that affects actually all of their states, all of their other deeds, all of their other, whatever else they do. So our speech is really something to watch, because we know that it affects not just like, it affects our other states. If I want to say that if you don't feel like doing something, if you don't feel like doing something at all, and you complain about it, I don't want to do this. Oh, I really don't want to. God, I have to do this. Guess what happens? You don't want to do it more. It actually, you made it worse. You literally made the feeling, the sensation, the whole thing, we made it worse on ourselves. If you don't feel like doing something and you don't say that, and you say instead, inshallah, Allah will make it easy, or I'll get done with it about that thing. And it's something good. Just remember that thing was something positive and put your hope in God. That thing becomes easier. I remember, again, same sheikh. I mentioned something to him that I thought was going to be really hard. He just goes, inshallah, sahal. Inshallah, it's easy. And I'm like, the way he said it, I was like, it's going to be easy, because he said it like that. And I don't want to say that it was easy, but it was a lot easier. It was after he said that, it was that for you. So having our hope in God and saying like, inshallah, God will make this easy for me, then we get to taste some of that, because that's where our heart was. Today we only got through chapter 3. There is no chapter 4. Chapter 4 was related. It was the tongue's role in cultivating the individual and society. But inshallah, we will end with that for today. And again, for us, just last week, the sort of like the main reflection point was, we ask our heart when we're trying to do something, like what is the most important thing or best thing we can do right now? ما هو الأحسن? And then the second question is, كيف أفعله بإحسان? How do I do that with excellence? Today's assignment from today's gathering is, what's the best thing I can say in this situation? What's the best thing I can say? Right. And again, what he talks about, the best speech is something that's going to be pleasing to God. And from that is something that brings joy and into people's hearts, or it can heal, or it is a form of divine remembrance. But what's the best thing I can say? Right. And then going back to that, how do I do that in the best way? It's always like the outward and the inward at the same time. Yes, which, yeah, sorry. Absolutely. Sometimes silence is the best thing that we can say. We don't always have to say something. And actually, the default, and I'm afraid of even saying it because I need to practice it before I say it, is the default is actually silence. And we break our silence with speech when we've like made the intention that what I'm going to say is going to better the silence. It's better than the silence. So as in, when I think about the sheikh entering the conversation about the cat and the rat, he enters, he didn't have to say something, but what did he do when he entered the conversation in that way? Is he honored someone and he validated someone and he um, showed that he sees them and he sees what they're going through by despite the fact that they're very hidden in the midst of everything that's happening. And so, you know, that was, I think, something that brought happiness and inshallah reward and was the best thing that could have been said. Wallahu alam. Forgive me, because of our schedule, because of Ramadan, I have to just close with dua and I don't have time for questions tonight, but if people want to stay after, we can maybe talk about it. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضى واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم آمين يا رب العالمين اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. O God, give us success to attain what you love and are pleased with. Make us amongst your felicitous servants. Allow us to die on the statement of guidance. Teach us what will benefit us and give us the success to act upon what you have taught us. Make that in which we are engaged pure and devoted to your noble face. Ameen, O Lord of the worlds. O God, make this gathering of ours a gathering enveloped in mercy, and our parting thereafter a parting of our sins purged and forgiven, not one of us wretched or deprived. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and upon his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all for joining.
Alaikum assalam, Shaykha. If you're not heading out, Shaykha, can I ask you a question unrelated to class for a sister, or are you closing the doors in?
Maybe we can talk, inshallah, but maybe if on my phone, inshallah, for
Okay.
today.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.